Thank you for joining us from College to Career, a webinar for parents of Brandeis seniors. My name is Alexandra Stephens, and I am the Associate Director of Career Programs and Engagement here at the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis. So happy to have you with us today. Our webinar will be an hour long and we'll leave ample time at the end for questions. So as you think of any, please feel free to submit them through the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll also be asking a few polls throughout the presentation today, so be sure to weigh in on your screen. This webinar will also be recorded and posted online later on this afternoon if you have to dash out for any reason. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Andrea Dine, who is the Executive Director of the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis. She is a university administrator with over 20 years of experience. Andrea provides creative and results-focused leadership and strategic vision for the Hiatt Career Center team. And her specialty areas within the field of student affairs and career development include strategic planning, technology integration, and data and assessment. Andrea earned a BA in English from UMass Amherst and an MA in Higher Education Administration from UConn. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. All right, and with that, I'll take it away. So thank you all for joining us for an hour this afternoon. Though it's slightly a gray day here in Massachusetts, I hope wherever you are, you're having warm and sunny skies on this hopefully lovely afternoon in the fall as we head into winter. As we get started today, we're going to have a quick overview, and I'll have a poll question for you momentarily. We'll go over the kind of current job climate and value of the liberal arts education. Unfortunately, there's very happy news in that realm. Reports are already coming out projecting starting salaries for new graduates going up over 5% in that coming year over last year's offers. And so there's some lovely positive news coming out in the news about that. We're going to briefly talk about the Career Center's development philosophy and how we work with students and the approach we use to help your students, what to expect and what you can do to help them now. And then looking forward, we'll be looking at really a focus on seniors as a whole, specifically what do seniors need to know, whether they're considering graduate or law school or professional school or looking into the world of work moving forward. But having said that, I'm curious to know how many of you have attended last year's webinar for parents, because what I'll do is I'll adjust my presentation accordingly and go more quickly over material we would have covered last year.
So if you all can just take a brief moment to weigh in. Did you attend last year's webinar for parents of sophomores and juniors, yes or no? And then I will just share the results with Andrea and we'll be off and running. Give you a couple more seconds to weigh in. Should just be popping up right on your screen. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and close that poll. So Andrea, it does look like it's primarily a new audience.
Okay.
90% did not attend last year's, and so 10% did.
Great. All right, so what I will do is kind of give you a quick overview. So for the 9 or 10% that were here last year, please bear with me. Some of this will be a little bit repetitive, but I want to make sure we're all working together on the same page. I want to lay out sort of how career centers and how college recruiting has changed from perhaps you were in school or even if we were comparing to about 10 years ago. So my flashback photo for you is actually a real picture of the Hiatt Career Center from 1993 that shows binders full of jobs and internships posted up on a bulletin board. So just to remind you, it wasn't so long ago when that was the norm for college recruiting, and that's what your seniors would be looking at for jobs and internships. Historically speaking, students would really think about careers and thinking about that piece starting senior year. Employers, expected to do extensive training of employees. They were kind of looking for smart, clever people, and they would hire them and have extensive training programs. They would present their job opportunities either on paper through the Career Center, or they may put it in classified ads, for example. And a majority of students at the time were hired by very large organizations that had very large recruiting teams. So, for example, if you think of a GE or a Procter & Gamble, they would have really armies of hundreds of recruiters that would work with each and every campus and actually physically go to the campus to do their recruiting. Now, of course, we have all kinds of technology involved and efficiencies in place for employers to do college recruiting. So right now, students, and you may know this from your own experience, students are thinking about career issues much earlier in their process. They may start using our Career Center in their very first year on campus. We work with about 50% of the freshman class each year in their first year. And so students are thinking about post-graduation in general earlier. That's not a blanket statement. There are some students, if we go to the Wayback Machine, there are some students today that are still just starting to think about their careers now as seniors. The other shift is employers' expectations. So employers are expecting more skills now than they would have in the past. And they're expecting college grads to have some work experience. They're not expecting the work they do or to hire them for jobs if they haven't necessarily done internships or summer work experiences or lab research or that kind of thing prior. They really have an expectation that the students have developed not perhaps every single skill, but skills, professional skills prior to employment. Students, again, we talked about that technology piece, students can access opportunities through a myriad of mediums. Companies are involved on LinkedIn, they're involved online, they use our BeHired recruiting system, they may recruit through their own website, and students are then accessing that data through their phone, their tablet, their computer, etc. And so those pieces have really, it's actually a lovely challenge to be working in a career center today as the technology evolves and changes, because it certainly keeps us on our toes about how do we work efficiently as a bridge, bringing the communities together of students and employers and alumni and parents. So it really is a lovely challenge. And most students are getting jobs now, not by those behemoth organizations I mentioned earlier, but really medium to small organizations. And so those organizations are less likely, or really unlikely in the case of small organizations, to have large recruiting teams. And so they'll conduct a majority of their recruiting directly electronically, whether again that's through our system or their own, and will reach out to students through electronic mediums, including social media. And so again, that's a tremendous shift from expecting employers to come to large career fairs on campus and engage directly in campus recruiting by physically coming to campus. For many organizations, that's not a realistic staffing possibility for them, but I'll speak later on in the presentation about how we partner with those organizations to recruit your students. The news, so the news actually, as I mentioned before, is getting better and better. There was a debate, or there always will be a debate about the advantages of different types of education. Really, as we look at the world of work now, I would certainly argue, and there are plenty of others that would join me in the choir, to really advocate that liberal arts provides the foundational skills for someone to have a career. It is not job focused in an exclusive job. But as we know, the job market changes all the time. The students that are graduating today will be applying for a set of jobs that this year's freshmen will be able to apply for jobs that don't exist yet now. And so the job market, as we know, has evolved and changed dramatically over time. And our expectation really is with the skills that liberal arts students gain, they're really able to surf that well and adjust accordingly, because as you may know from your students, that students have a variety of interests and skills, and that will really serve them for a lifetime, as opposed to a more specialized degree that might serve them for a particular job and then they might have to retrain for another. So the shift in the media has been pretty dramatic, though there certainly are still critics of liberal arts. The shift in the news have been very positive, and there are organizations that are really realizing the value add of liberal arts grads and recruiting them accordingly. And as I mentioned, the stats now even about starting salaries for students are starting to rise, which is lovely. Outcomes. And so for those of you that are looking at sort of what your expectations are for your grads, whether that they're interested in pursuing graduate school, they're looking to do employment. Some will look for employment just for a year or two before going to graduate school, so wherever they fit on that continuum. Our students do very well after graduation. We survey students. We're actually surveying the class of 2015 now, and we're collecting their data now. But we survey students within 6 months of graduation. So if they're a May grad, they'll be surveyed by the December of that year to find out sort of where they've landed. It is not uncommon for a student to be very engaged with their senior year at Brandeis. Perhaps they're doing a senior thesis, or they're doing original research, or they're very involved in student organizations. And so as a result of that involvement, they deprioritize the timing of their job search, and they start their job search upon graduation. So that is not uncommon for a student to make that decision. So we really measure within 6 months to find out really in a realistic view where our students land after graduation. And as you can see, they do quite well. I'm not going to go into this data in detail, but the data are extremely positive, and I encourage you to visit our website. Under About Hiatt, you would see our destination data, which goes into far greater detail than the slide about the field students enter in, and actually has a full listing going back in time of actual opportunities our students by major pursue after graduation, or engaged in after graduation. And so you can both look at the graduate schools they pursue immediately after graduation or engaged in after graduation, and the jobs as well. So that's a full data set. You're welcome to surf as your heart's desire. As you can see, again, about 97%, and that number really hasn't wavered. It's within a couple percentage points, even when we were in the depths of the recession. And so what we're seeing now, as the economy has improved, is we've had students already coming in weighing multiple offers, and we're working with students on how to negotiate potentially those offers off each other as they pursue the ideal employment for their professional goals. And I'm curious to know if you know what your students now are, I want to know, what you wanted to do when you knew what you wanted to do after graduation.
So this is just a fun little question. We'd love for you all to weigh in. The poll is up on your screen now. When did you know what career you wanted to have for the rest of your life? Was it during your college years, 18 to 21? Will we get some folks being honest and saying that they're still figuring it out? Where age-wise did you really figure out what you wanted to do in terms of your career? And hopefully this will give you a little sympathy for your graduating senior. And we'll share the results in just a few seconds as soon as other folks weigh in. We'll give you 3 more seconds to vote. And then I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. So, love this. About a quarter of you still figuring it out. 10% within the 50 to 65 age range. About a quarter between 18 and 21. Another quarter in those 10 years out of college. So thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and I think, thank you. And that really reflects really what your students are experiencing as well. There are a cadre of students that really have some very clear career goals, and it remains to be seen whether they remain their career goals for life or they adjust over time. And we have other students that are really still in the depths of figuring that out. And so if your student, for example, students run the gamut. We may have students that we call frequent flyers that are in the Career Center all the time, and there are others who have not yet chosen to come in. And that's obviously something you can help us with if your students not come in, to encourage them to come. But we really work with students where they are. We're really thrilled to see them whenever they're ready to have and sit down with us and have that conversation about what might be a match for them. And so I'm going to give you an overview of sort of how we approach that conversation with students. Philosophically, we look at career development as a process that evolves for one's lifetime. And so our Career Center purposefully is not only full service to students, but we're also full service to alumni for life. And regardless of when someone's coming into the office, we really work with them sort of in this way. The first thing that we start with really is that understanding the student has of themselves. What's important to them, what skills do they have, what's interesting to them. And I joke that sounds very simplistic, but I often tease students, like, who would want a job that you don't think is important, you're not good at, and you find boring? That would be ridiculous. And so that important component is often something students want to skip over. They're like, okay, just tell me what to do, or I just want a job. But the component of really clearly identifying their values, skills, and interests is actually a very strategic long-term goal, because what it will allow them to do is really have a better visualization and understanding as they learn about career fields, what fields might be a match for them. It will then allow them to articulate what they have that the employer needs. And students sometimes can speak about their skills, but sometimes they have a hard time mapping those skills to an employer needs. And I often talk to students about, employers are selfish beings, or graduate schools are selfish beings as well. They're really looking to bring people in that are a good fit and really will make their either program, if it's a graduate school, be exceptional, or in the case of an employer, their job's easier as a supervisor because they're bringing skills and attributes that are really helpful in their workspace. And that piece is then they're looking for explicit skills, and they're looking for that values and interest match for what they do so that they have an engaged set of employees. And so that piece, that translation piece, really starts with that self-knowledge first. Then we work with students to identify those career fields that are a potential match for them around those vectors, their strengths, their interests, something they're passionate about. Not everyone has that kind of one area of passion. For most of our students, there are many places in the workplace that might be a good match for them, but you only know what you know, right? So students have mysterious knowledge of the workforce. They may even vaguely understand what you do for a living, but maybe not your day-to-day of if you're working the kind of work that you do. And so we really work with them to get an on-the-ground understanding, and that's everything from research to networking to talking to professionals who work in their particular field, both by their outreach, and we bring them on campus for them to meet with during events, which I'll talk about later as well. And then we're working with them on that sort of professional suite of skills that I'll go to in greater detail. What I'm curious about from you is sort of where is your student following, like based on the conversations you've had with them thus far, what are they thinking about doing after graduation?
Okay, so we are going to launch our third poll right up on your screen. What is your senior planning to do post-graduation? Maybe they don't know yet. That's totally fine. Do they plan to work full-time? Are they interested in the year in service program like AmeriCorps or Teach for America? Are they planning to attend graduate or professional school like law school or medical school? Or are you not quite sure? And sometimes that is the case as well. So we'd love for you to weigh in, and then we will share the results, and Andrea will, tailor the rest of the presentation based on what your responses are here. So I'll give you a few more seconds to weigh in, and then I will go ahead and share the results with all of you. So it looks like about 20% of the students don't know quite yet. The vast majority are planning to work full-time, with a couple doing a year in service program, and about 16% headed to graduate or professional school.
All right, well, thank you. And that is relatively reflective of our numbers on the whole. It looks like the parents that are in attendance today are a little skewed on the work side, which is fine. Our students usually, give or take a third, probably just a little shy of that, do pursue graduate education after graduation. That is a far less common thing today than in times past. Most students will take time off and work or do other things prior to going to graduate school. And that's with a few fields as an exception. Certain PhD programs are more common to go straight through. But the vast amount of students that will be attending graduate school today will not be going straight through. And we're watching the average age of professional programs, the starting year of professional programs, whether they be MBA, which has had a long trend to expect work experience prior to enrollment, to fields like law, where historically students went straight through. Those starting ages are going up and up and up, and many of them are now in their mid to upper 20s when students go to graduate school. One of the things I also wanted to address is how students learn about our office and how we communicate with students. That is a great question that's come up in webinars past, so I wanted to make sure we addressed it with you here. We communicate with students all the time. As you know, sometimes your students aren't always tuned in when we're trying to communicate with them, but we do everything from regular emails. We're on social media. Right now we're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and are looking and analyzing whether we move to Pinterest as well. We are at a lot of campus events, and so you will certainly see us if you come up for Fall Fest or any of the large programs either prior to graduation or while they're here. So we're often tabling around campus, so they might run into us in campus locations like cafeteria or the campus center. We also do a lot of joint programming with student organizations, other academic departments, and administrative offices. So just this week, for example, I'm speaking in environmental studies in one of their classes, and that's very common for our staff to do. We also get a lot of direct referrals. So we have a liaison program where we work with each academic department as well as administrative offices and areas on campus. And our partners there regularly refer students into our office and may refer them to a particular career counselor, for example, that they think they might be a good match for. Students also all, upon entry of Brandeis, have an account in our system. Our system is called BeHired. It has our jobs and internships, our calendar, our resources, which I'll cover more details on resources in a moment. But every single student at Brandeis has a BeHired account, and they access it with their regular login ID. And most importantly, certainly for today's presentation, you are also a conduit for us to help encourage your student to come into the Career Center. And as I said, students will run the gamut at this point in senior year. We may have students that have absolutely no idea what they want to do, and we might have students that are quite self-directed. We're thrilled to see them at any point in time throughout that process. Skills-wise, so if we talk about the kinds of skills students are developing, and I've integrated both sort of a little bit of graduate school as well as overall professional skills. And I'll go into actual naming resources in a moment and describing them. Certainly one of them is career research. And so whether a student's going to graduate school or law school, their ability to really do comprehensive research in a practical applied way, kind of beyond their academic specialty, is critically important, because that is that component where you figure out sort of what the reality of a role is, or an organization or a company. That also makes a huge difference. One of the first questions I'll get going into an interview is, what do you know about our company, or what do you know about this field? And so that we work with them on becoming experts in career field research, and really just transferring that research skill that they already have from Brandeis into a professional setting. The other critical component is professional communication. And of course, that has many facets. So it's everything from etiquette to networking and resumes and cover letters and writing essays and persuasive documents and interviewing. Those are the kinds of things. We also work with students, as I mentioned before, on negotiation when they get to that point. Each of these skills, we run regular workshops. We have extensive information online on our website and meet with students one-on-one for these issues as well. Of course, job and internship search strategy. We find that students, this is new for them, even though they may have maybe done an internship or just summer job search before. Doing a professional job search really is a next level, taking to next level on kind of sophistication and really making a value added case for yourself to an employer. So we work with students extensively on that particular component, as well as if they're pursuing advanced study, really their application strategy. How do you, though we are not experts in every possible field the student may go to graduate school in, we can advise them in the strategy of how does one research and select graduate schools that are an appropriate match for their professional goals. We can help them specifically with the essays they're writing. Often there's a staff member on site that will be one of their readers, for example, for their personal statement for graduate school, and we can help them kind of debate the pros and cons and really help them make stronger decisions for themselves about what graduate school programs are the best match. We'll speak briefly. There were about 10% or so of folks that were on the call about graduate school. As you may know, your students may be well embroiled in the graduate school application process now, but I'm going to cover both if your student is applying now or if they're thinking about applying in the future. So if they're, for example, applying in a few years out. If they're applying now, they really hopefully are in the thick of the process. Our counselors have been extraordinarily busy working with students on their personal statements for graduate school. Deadlines are as early November, but really run all the way through the summer, depending on the program. Graduate school applications are much more idiosyncratic than undergraduate applications. There is no common app. There are no kind of common questions. The application needs to be tailored for each school. And also, the way in which you select a school is very different. There's far less value in, I would say, brand recognition for graduate school. So I always, if a student's, for example, going into biochemistry or they're looking at I don't know, historical research of the US in the 1920s. They really need to know explicitly what actual academic department programs are a match for their area of study. How are they a match with those faculty in that program? So you can't go by a brand name to know if that program specifically in their academic area of study is one of the best in the country. You can research that, you can network and get that information, but it is not like flipping through a college ranking system and seeing, oh, gee, that school is well respected. You can have a school that has extraordinary brand recognition that may have a terrible program in their area of graduate school study. And so it's really critical that they make that final selection carefully and apply really to the best programs that are a match for them. The other thing that students are finishing up, and most students have gotten these complete, but they may not be, GREs are offered all the time now, so they might still be taking them, is finishing their exams. And the critical piece that students can do even now, even if they're not applying to graduate school until next semester, is really connect with their supervisors or faculty to really secure excellent recommendations for their graduate programs. Brandeis faculty in general really like to write customized recommendations for each program to which the student is applying. Those students can also bank their recommendations to use in the future. And the program we use to do that is actually online portfolio management program called Intrafolio. And so students can have a recommendation written now and bank it for later in this year or in the future as well. And then, of course, students are also currently submitting applications for those graduate programs that have earlier deadlines. I always encourage the student to explicitly review and follow the directions from each graduate program in the course of their application, because the directions can be quite distinct program to program. And for them to receive the consideration they deserve, they need to follow that quite carefully. For those applying in the future, looking forward, they can, in general, timeline-wise, they'll apply the year before they enroll. So the folks that are applying now are generally enrolling the fall semester of 2016. And that rule applies pretty well across the board, is that really you're applying the year before you're actually enrolling. So it really requires some early planning. You don't think of, in the early summer, I'd like to go to graduate school in the fall. The process usually is much longer than that. The other thing they can do is bank exams. And what that means is most graduate school programs, though not all, require certain kinds of testing. LSAT, for example, for law school, MCAT for medical, GRE for most graduate school programs, GMAT for most business programs. Again, programs can be idiosyncratic, but usually those scores are good for at least 5 years. And so if your student is thinking about looking at graduate school in the relatively near future, and they're currently honestly in the habit of taking exams, it might make sense for them to take the exam now and just bank it for their application in the future. Studies have shown that students do better on the exams, not because they're not as smart 2 years from now, but just because they're in the habit of taking exams, they will perform better on standardized exams. So many students will take them and just keep them on hold until they actually need them. As I mentioned, students can get recommendations now and use Intrafolio to store them. However, because Brandeis faculty really, most of them prefer to write customized recommendations for graduate school, I recommend not only might they secure a recommendation, but really stay in touch with those individuals and keep them updated, even if it's only a few times a year, about what they're doing, so that they're fresh in, for example, the faculty member's memory. And so then when they're really ready to apply, they have a refreshed, updated recommendation from that faculty member. And once graduate school is this bridge of, you go to graduate school to achieve a particular professional goal. And so I often get the question is like, how does a student know when they're ready to go to graduate school? And I often reply that when their professional goal is such that they have to go to graduate school to achieve it, then that is a clear sign that it's time for them to go back to graduate school. And because those pieces are directly related.
We do have one question, Andrea, just about the types of graduate programs that Brandeis offers. if you could just speak to the different graduate schools that exist at Brandeis. There is a question, is it easier for a Brandeis graduate to be accepted into this program? I think that's certainly a question for the graduate school admissions team.
For sure.
But if you want to just touch on that.
I have to say, I think they might be slightly biased pro Brandeis because they are here. We have a variety of graduate schools at Brandeis. The one that is the closest cousin to the undergraduate programs is the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And so many of those departments, though not all, have a parallel in the undergraduate. So perhaps a PhD in psychology would be an example of something that's a parallel, or a master's in history, for example. We have some specialized programs in the graduate school we do not have in the undergraduate, and bioinformatics. There are several programs that exist in the graduate school. We also have extensive options for students that want to go into education, that want that master's program to be qualified for licensure, to get teaching licensure in whether it's Massachusetts or another state. And so there are a variety of programs offered through Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. We also have the Heller School of Public Policy. They are focused, it's an incredibly amazing global school. They're probably, I don't know what their current ranking is. They're always in the top 3 of schools of their type in the country. They have an extraordinary international reputation. So for students that are interested in international public policy, for example, or interested in doing international NGO work after graduation, that's often a very popular option. They do lean, some of their students are quite experienced, though they do take some students straight through from undergraduate to the graduate school program. Many of their graduate students are a little bit older. We also have the International School of Business that has a whole suite of graduate school offerings that are business focused. And last but not least, we have the RAB School. The RAB School is really more professional focused, and so a majority of the professionals or the students enrolled in the RAB college are professionals currently working full-time in their field. That's how their programs are a little bit different and designed to be done online or at a distance for folks that are working full-time. So that's kind of the overview. They do all recruit from the undergraduate population and regularly go to whether it's our career graduate school fair or do tabling on campus recruit undergraduates. All right, shifting to employment. Now, I talked about before how kind of employers recruit students from campus. We do have some employers that do come directly to campus to recruit. Others will do that in a virtual way, whether it's through webinars or our online portal BeHired to do applications. But I want to give you an idea of sort of the timeline of when folks recruit. Now, my caveat is this is not a guarantee. Companies can recruit at any time in any field. But I just want to give you the sense of sort of what the flow of the year looks like for seniors who are graduating. Specifically for folks that are December grads, we actually have companies coming to campus specifically now and posting with us to recruit December grads. So if your student falls in that category and is about to graduate next month, I think I've frightened you and me both with that statement for those that are graduating so soon. Those companies are recruiting now in all fields because they're looking for folks that can start. They don't want to wait till May. They want folks that can start earlier. So we're seeing December grad postings right now. Types of employers that tend to recruit early. So I've labeled them here as the early birds. These are employers that do a majority of their recruiting fall semester for May grads. And so I'm counting anyone that's like 50% and above if they do at least a half, if not more, if they're recruiting in the fall semester. It includes large competitive finance firms. iBanking would fall into this category. Certainly management consulting, the sort of Boston Consulting Group, et cetera, will recruit early this semester. Federal government, particularly those that have a high security or background check. Federal government security checks and background checks can take a year, and some shorter, certainly some longer, but they tend to recruit a little earlier. Offices like the State Department, FBI, CIA, etc., will recruit early so that they have time to process those security clearances before someone would actually start. And also there are some very large rotational programs that are hoping to come in and snatch top students earlier in the semester. Often what drives employers to recruit earlier, in the case particularly of finance and management and rotational programs, is they're looking to come on campus quickly and recruit what they consider the top students for them early on in that time period. Now that doesn't mean they stop recruiting in the spring, but they just are heavily engaged with recruiting in the fall. And then I joke the traditional recruiting, a vast majority of employers do their recruiting for May grads in the spring semester. They are able to look at, and again, remember I said many of the employers are small to medium size. So they look at their staffing structure, their orders coming in, or the clients they're working with, and they say, okay, we are either need to replace folks that are going back to graduate school or just normal attrition from the company, and we need to fill those positions. And those timelines often start certainly sort of January, February, March, and that will go all the way through May and June. That will get postings from some of the folks that are still recruiting from the early birds, and then really the vast majority of postings will get in that spring semester.
Andrea, I just wanted to add that we do hear from a lot of employers in that May to June timeframe when seniors have already left campus and they're a little harder for us to reach. That's not to say that those positions aren't all making it into our recruiting system. They are. So it's important for you to remind your senior that even after they graduate, they can still not only access our career services because we are free of charge for life to all Brandeis undergraduate alumni, but also that recruiters and employers are continuing to post positions throughout the summer and to check back for updates.
Yeah, excellent. Quite true. And computer science, I was torn about which category to put them in, so I just put them in year-round. There is a shortage of computer science, and there has been that's accumulated over time. And so they've done a tremendous amount of recruiting already on campus, but that will continue through the spring semester. Specifically for resources, so as students are thinking about what is a match for them, what can they do with their major, how does that map with the world of work, I want to just highlight a few, again, these are scratching the surface, but a few examples of the kinds of resources that we have for your student. The very popular one for a variety of reasons are major pages. So we have dedicated web pages for each and every major at Brandeis that maps out for students the skills and abilities that they've developed as a result of being that major, because that's something they struggle with defining. They might say, I'm a history major, but for an employer, they need to talk about analysis and research and communication skills. It also has sample examples of alumni and what alumni have gone on to do with that major. Of course, it maps the destination data so they can see what people with their major did immediately after graduation. And it also illustrates for their major what types of employers and what specific roles employers have that seek their particular major. So those are customized pages to them by major. And of course, your student may have more than one major, so they may have a good amount of reading to do about thinking about that intersection. We also have a resource called Spotlight on Careers, which is we're part of a consortium that develops this particular educational resource that's focused on field education. So for example, a student might say, I'm really interested in communications and marketing, but they may not have a depth of an understanding of what that field actually entails. And so Spotlight on Careers really takes those broad categories and breaks it down for a student. What's the vocabulary they use in that field? What are job titles? That's often a stumbling block for students. If you don't know what a job is called, and so you search for it using the wrong vocabulary, you find nothing, and then students will assume there's nothing out there for them, when in fact they might just be using the wrong vocabulary. So it enables them to use the correct vocabulary. It will give them field-specific job search sites that are unique for that particular field of interest, salary information, alumni reviews, and specific interviewing and resume tips for that particular field. There are some fields that use sort of unique ways of interviewing students. And they should always go into their interview prepared with the ways in which and the mediums through which employers will be interviewing with them, and what their potential answers would be for really anything that might come up. And this helps them contextualize it by field. As I mentioned before, BeHired is an umbrella resource that we use that students log into with their unit ID. It has our thousands of job postings, employers, our event calendars, etc. But specifically, I just highlighted 3 here. Under the articles section, we have very specific more tailored, in-depth resources for students. One of them is Vault, and we subscribe to that. You can access Vault publicly, but many of the resources at a greater depth are pay. We have a subscription on behalf of students so they can use the entire site for free. That is much, much greater depth about each career field. So whereas Spotlight might be a lovely introduction that gets a student started, Vault is where they do that intense, deep research about a field, the interviewing questions. If a field has specific, unique ways of interviewing, so management consulting may use a consulting interview format, it has training guides specifically on that area. So it's a really lovely resource that has depth. Students are often, they talk about, well, how much am I going to make after graduation? Of course, that ranges by field. But the NACE salary survey, NACE stands for National Association of Colleges and Employers, in which we are a member. Brandeis is a member. And so we have the NACE salary survey so they can actually see what new grads in a particular career field or area are earning immediately after graduation. So it takes out that kind of mystery, or some of the challenges with using like a survey.com kind of site is that they're including everybody's salary, not just new grads. So NACE is very helpful. The salary survey is very helpful to give that realistic expectation. And again, speaking about depth, we also have a subscription to Privco. Privco is a kind of unusual resource in that it has extensive data about private companies. So when a student's at the point that they're researching very specific organizations, a company that's publicly traded, you might be able to look at their annual report and you can get a tremendous amount of information about them online and that's publicly available. But private companies are much more challenging. Privco actually has data and research on those private companies so the student can be better informed when they're pursuing those particular organizations. And again, this is just a sampling, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that we have. I mentioned Spotlight on Careers before as part of a consortia. That consortia is the Liberal Arts Career Network, or LACN for short. We also have a shared database with those 40 colleges that are members of LACN. So our diversity, geographic diversity and opportunity diversity, both between BeHired postings as well as LACN, is really fantastic. We just switched platform systems this year for BeHired, and we have seen an incredible increase in the geographic location. So if your students searching, for example, West Coast or wherever they may be, whether it's California or Texas or Florida or Chicago, we're seeing a dramatic increase in diversity and geographic location of postings. And the LACN database helps us do that as well. There are member colleges in, all over the place. Let's see, West Coast, California, Midwest, South, and the Northeast as well. And so that database has jobs that they may be interested in, and they are actually posted by the Career Center. So those are opportunities that are vetted by a Career Center before sharing with the group, and there's policies we follow for that. So we're talking pithy job opportunities. The other piece I'd recommend for you, because we have so many resources, I know it can be hard to keep track, I would like to remind you that we do have a kind of guide for an overview of resources we provide your students on our Hiatt website parent pages. So feel free to refer to them. We also have a recording there that talks about the types of workshops and programs Hiatt offers and makes recommendations by class year. And so that's a very short one. It's about 7 minutes, but we'll give you an overview of more specific programs. Macro, so the big programs that we do and offer regularly, we actually have the Biotech Industry Night right on our heels, about to happen. We do very specialized industry nights in which we invite professionals to come in for a case competition. So they actually bring a workplace dilemma or issue they're wrangling with for the students to compete on teams to solve their problems. And so they get the case, they work with the data that's provided to come up with recommendations and solutions for the employers, and then they actually present them with the employer. It's fantastic. The students get to really showcase their skills and their strengths and their teamwork and their presentation skills. It's really fantastic. And then it opens up into a wider field-based networking night that has alumni and parents and professionals from all kinds of organizations. So a typical industry night, students might have 2 to 4, depending on the night, cases that they're competing in, and then they may be networking with upwards of 30 plus professionals in those particular industry nights. The employer spotlight and information sessions also happen all the time. So these are smaller events that take place all over campus, where employers come in to speak directly with students about their organization and the opportunities they have available, whether that's on a more one-on-one session or they're holding a workshop for a group of people. We also do have a just-in-time career fair that happens in the spring. That is, I talked about employers realizing they have hiring needs just before graduation, as Alexandra mentioned, even immediately after graduation. And those folks come in the spring. I also highly recommend, if your student's not already tuned into our activities over winter break, I feel like we're an office that doesn't sleep. We're super busy during winter break. We have the Career and Internship Connection career fairs for both jobs and internships. In the winter, they're in LA, Chicago, DC. No. Oh, I did it wrong. I'm sorry. I keep flashback to previous years. LA, DC, Boston, and New York. I got that right. Alexandra's nodding. I've got it right this time. I keep flashing back to previous years. So they are on-site career fairs that take place. There are also networking nights in both, Brandeis networking nights in both New York and DC. And so those are extraordinary opportunities for students to apply for jobs and also speak with professionals in their field in a geographic area of choice. And again, our BeHired system is constantly being updated with jobs literally every day as they come into the system. For some of the skill development, I mentioned the video we have available, but for skill development, we also have, for those students that are nervous about networking, and networking can be very anxiety-ridden for students, really the easiest thing for them to do is write an ad for themselves about what they want to learn. And that program is called Wisdom Wanted. And if you think of a position desired postings from decades ago, they actually write an ad about what it is they'd like to learn. And then that ad goes to alumni and parents and partners in the wider community to actually get back to that student directly and answer their professional question. And that could be as vague as, I'm a psychology major and I don't know what I want to do, or it could be incredibly specific, like I'm a researcher interested in extremophiles and I want to talk to other marine biologists. It can be, again, as broad or as narrow as they would like. And it's a less stress-related way, easier step for them to kind of get their toe in the water for networking, though, of course, I still expect them to dive in further on, but that's a great way to get started. We also have a very large LinkedIn group, Brandeis University Career Connections, that bring together students, alumni, parents, and other partners to do professional networking through LinkedIn. We also bring in professionals to do informational interviews with students so students can better learn about their fields during alumni employer office hours as well. And Alexandra, there's also a piece, as I've mentioned, you've heard I've used the term parents come up a variety of times, where we have parents coming for industry nights and getting involved with Wisdom Wanted and other things. So I'll turn that over to you, Alexandra, to give a better overview of that.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So just before we launch into the Q&A period of this, I wanted to give a little plug for ways that you can be involved and really help partner with us on providing career resources to your student. So we were really thrilled a few years ago to be able to incorporate parents into all of our alumni volunteer opportunities. So anything that alumni can do, parents can do too. You can share career advice through the Wisdom Wanted program or by attending one of those industry-specific networking nights or the ones in New York and DC. We're also always looking to expand our employer relations and employer development. So if you have an open job or internship at your organization, we'd love to hear about it, and you can share that with us, and we'd be happy to post it in our system. And there are, of course, university-wide opportunities to get involved as well. This is a link here to the overall Brandeis calendar, where we hope to see you back for Fall Fest and certainly for commencement, sports games, and everything in between. So lots of ways to get involved. So before we get to your questions, I just have one last question for you in the poll, and that is, would you be willing to be a career resource to Brandeis students in one of these ways? And if you could just weigh in briefly, yes, no, maybe so. And if you do say maybe, we'd be happy to send you more information about our programs. You'll also have an opportunity to indicate your interest in our follow-up survey, so please feel free to do that as well. And I'll give you just a couple more seconds to weigh in before turning it over to you for your questions. Thanks so much for weighing in and for your interest.
All right.
So questions. Okay, we have a lot coming in, and feel free as you think of them to keep typing them in. Andrea, you mentioned briefly about December grads. This question is specifically about a student who's graduating in December,
Yep.
and this parent is wondering if you have specific advice for this group of grads in terms of being out of the gate sooner than others. Are there advantages? Are there disadvantages? I know you had said there were postings for them already coming up in our BeHired system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it evens out, sort of advantages and disadvantages sort of even out. I think that employers that are looking to fill their staffing needs now, December grads are at a tremendous advantage because there are far fewer folks that graduate in December than in May. So in that perspective, the pool of students applying for a particular entry-level position is smaller. On the flip side of that, one of the disadvantages is that for programs that have a fixed start date so that they bring in all of new employees at the same time and get them started simultaneously in training, many of those won't open up until June. And so for December grads, I mean, it's not, in the realm of time period, not a super long time, but depending on what it is the student is looking for, they may choose to apply, for example, to programs that actually start in May or June. Or again, if they would like immediate employment, their advantage is it's a smaller pool. Employers do, as I mentioned earlier, recruit specifically for December grads, and we're seeing those postings already come in. And so if you have a December grad, I'd encourage them to come in, and whether they've gotten started with us already or not, to come in and start having those conversations about, again, wherever they are, what they don't know what they're looking for, or if they do know what they're looking for, really how to strategically target those types of employers. And the nice piece about that is that with that sort of break, not only do they graduate, but we often have a increased availability over breaks because the students that aren't graduating till May, we often give them their homework assignments to work on over break. And it's often appointment-wise a quieter time over winter break and into January because it's before the May rush and it's before folks that are doing internship rush. And so our availability is actually pretty good over break and into January and February, whereas it gets a little tighter when everyone's a job and internship searching in the spring.
Thanks, Andrea. We're getting several questions about copies of this presentation, and can you share it with your student? Yes and yes. So you will automatically receive a link to the copy of the PowerPoint slides as well as the recording that you can certainly feel free to share with your senior. A couple other questions. We're getting in a lot of great questions here. In applying for jobs, do you need all of the skills that the employer is requesting? In other words, if the student did not learn specific skills at Brandeis, are employers willing to train them?
Yeah, and so I have a terrible it depends answers, but let me talk about sort of how you would address that. So in general for students, employers are looking for key skills, the strategy, communication, problem solving, quant, if it's a quant related position, analytical pieces again. So most students will have a majority of the skills that employers are looking for, hopefully in their field because it's a match to their skills and interests. However, sometimes an employer will have a very explicit skill responsibility that they may not have had it in their coursework. There's a couple ways that can be addressed. Brandeis has a full unlimited subscription to a resource called lynda.com. Where they can actually train on whether it's a particular software an employer wants or a particular skill, and they can train up really quickly on that particular skill, whether it's they need to know Bloomberg or they need to know Excel in a certain way or a graphic design software program that they may not be familiar with. And we have those resources for them on campus so they can be a quick study and really learn those programs without having had it in a class. So that's one option. There are other programs and workshops skills workshops offered throughout campus, sometimes by academic departments and sometimes by the Brandeis Library, that can give them some in-person lessons as well. And so that is one way kind of beyond the academic course load where they can pick up those very employer-specific skills that they need for a particular posting. And hopefully if they've thought about what career field they're interested in, those kinds of skill requirements that employers have are not a complete surprise to them. And there are, again, places while they're still on campus that they certainly can learn those while they're here.
Great. Thanks so much. Another question here is about what resources do you provide for graduates who are interested in employment opportunities abroad? So that long distance job search.
Yeah, so there's a variety of things. One of the really nice resources we have is called Going Global, and it's exactly designed, it's perfect for your question, exactly designed for an international job search. And of course, we have students in different scenarios. We have international students that are job searching in their home country, and we actually have very specialized workshops for international students, both for the job search in your home country and as well as a job search in the United States and a job search in a third-party country. And those are actually run by my colleague Jane Pavese. She's a wonderful expert in that field. There are also, of course, U.S. citizens, domestic students looking to work abroad. Working abroad is incredibly complex as the laws around employment, just as they are in the United States, are quite strict depending on the country your student is pursuing. And so Going Global outlines explicitly what are guidelines, visa requirements, work requirements, etc. for particular countries. It goes through the career fields that are most hiring in that location. It covers the specific documents in both English and the native language of that country, whether that's a resume or a cover letter, professional etiquette, all those kinds of things. And so really is a tremendous resource for that. I will say in most cases, as it's true for the United States, it can be very challenging to be, for example, a U.S. citizen job searching abroad. That can be incredibly difficult because countries are wanting to prioritize, true in the U.S. as well, jobs for their own citizens. And so that is challenging. So if you have a student that's looking to work in a country not their own, or in which they do not have citizenship, the earlier they start working on and researching that, the better. We do have some expertise in the office on that, but it can be tremendously challenging.
We're also getting a couple questions, Andrea, about can students who graduate in December and remain in Boston still use the Hiatt Career Center's in-person resources? And for how
Absolutely.
long after graduation can they use Hiatt resources? We're so excited to offer free alumni career services for life, which includes in-person appointments, over the phone, Skype, as well as a number of alumni-specific programming. But also, the first year after graduation, your student is welcome to come back and attend any of the student programs. So that's open to them as recent graduates as well, particularly if they stay in the area.
Yeah, and to that point, when I start thinking about how many alumni appointments, career counseling appointments we do every year, we're certainly over 900. We're heading towards 1,000. So our alumni population take advantage of the opportunities they have with our office. We can work with them, again, if they're locally in person. We also work with them by phone and Skype.
So the next question we have is about networking. So my child is shy about networking and doesn't see how important it is. We also got another question in advance of the webinar about this. How do we convince our children of the value of networking? How do we convince them that this approach is probably better than just applying online to job postings? So how can we help? Collectively.
Right, how can we help? And if anyone has a magic bullet for that, I want you to just call me immediately after the webinar and we'll have a much longer conversation. What I'm trying to do when I'm working with students, or our office is working with students about networking, is to really normalize it for them. Students have this perception that networking is this big, scary thing that they've never done before and is somehow scary or threatening, or they're taking advantage of someone else, or they'll say, well, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm not going to ask for help. The practical reality is they're networking all of the time. They just don't call it that. And so I'll often give students an example. You know, if someone a freshman, you're a senior now, if a freshman wanted to talk to you about your department and what classes you took and what faculty you'd recommend, would you have that conversation? And they kind of look at me quizzically and say, of course, like that's not a big deal. I was like, exactly, it's not a big deal. Networking is about asking someone who knows something more than you a question or series of questions. And so one of the approaches I'm using to try to take out that fear factor is to really normalize it for them. Students talk to each other all the time about what classes they're going to take, what do they think about particular faculty, what are they doing over the weekend, where are they eating, all those kinds of things. They're doing networking all the time, but they just don't frame it in that way. And so then it makes quote unquote professional networking look like a much scarier thing than it actually is. And so I try to parallel in the same way you would answer a question of a freshman, an alum would ask a question of you, because you know where they're coming from, you understand sort of what they might know or not know and what they need, and you want to facilitate helping them. I do coach them, though, specifically that they should ask a specific question or questions to an alum or with the person with whom they're networking. So when I do the parallel, I said, someone from your high school called and they said, I'd really like to know about Brandeis and how you decided to come to Brandeis. That might be an easy question to answer for you. Whereas if someone called you and said, hi, I have no idea what I want to do for my life, that's a much more frightening question. You might not respond to that person. And so I also encourage them as they think about networking to be the researcher for their own life and really ask pointed research questions, which not only helps them get the information, of course, that they need, but it also helps the person to whom they're reaching out plan and think about what they're going to say before they talk, and makes them more likely to say yes to that networking outreach.
Thanks, Andrea. We're also getting a couple questions, and I know we're at time here, so maybe we have time for 2 more questions. The first is a quick one. Are there designated career counselors based on major? And can my child feel free to meet with anyone in the Career Center? So the quick answer is no and yes. We are all generalist counselors here, so your student could meet with anyone. At the same time, there are counselors with specific interest areas in the arts. We have a psychologist on staff, so she's really great for PhD programs and graduate programs in the sciences. And so your student can feel free to bop around and really find who the best fit is for them.
Right. And the front desk will also help navigate that. So if the student comes in and says what it is that I'm interested in talking to a career counselor about a particular career field or an area or an interest or whatever that may be, they will be able to help direct them to the person that will be the best match for them. And even if they start working with someone and that they're working with counselor A, and counselor A is like, wow, given your interests, I also recommend you speak with this other counselor as well, because they have specialized knowledge that will be helpful to you. So we do internal referrals across the staff all of the time. But because the world of work is not organized by major, our staff are much more likely to have areas of expertise that are field-based rather than academic major-based.
Okay, great. And then last question, because we are at time. This parent says, I've noticed a number of companies either in or near Waltham that may be relevant to my students' interests. Can Hiatt be of help in facilitating introductions or networking with local hiring managers? So if you want to speak a little bit about how we do our employer development,
sure.
And how we can work with students to reach out to employers that we might not have a previous relationship with.
Yeah, and I think I'll address that backwards. So for employers with whom we've worked before, the student, I've mentioned BeHired a few times, the student has an index essentially in BeHired that they can look at all the employers with whom we've had a relationship with, whether they be in Waltham or elsewhere. And so they can go to the employer section of that and look up a particular employer to see if we've worked with them before. That being said, we are involved, for example, in the Waltham Chamber of Commerce. We're involved with the Massachusetts Life Sciences offices, which are also located in Waltham. And so we work with a variety of employers in different ways to help students gain employment in the immediate local area. So for students, they certainly can look to see if we worked with them before. We can certainly more than happy to assist them in their strategy of reaching out to those particular employers. And certainly through LinkedIn and other ways have ways of helping them reach out to alumni who work in those organizations. Because as you may know, this may be true in your place of employment, is that internal referrals get a much higher level of consideration, even higher than a random connection to a hiring manager. If you have someone that is a valued employee of an organization that refers someone in, they get sort of top line attention within that organization. Our employer relations team, to the first part of your question, Alexandra, around we have 3 full-time professionals on our employer relations team. They also have a graduate intern, and their role is to really build partnerships and relationships with all employers. We do divide their categories up by the fields students are most interested in pursuing, and so we litmus test that both by the graduation data and interests that students indicate in their profile of career fields that they're interested in. And so we kind of divide and conquer by industry and area to really have a plethora of opportunities for our students and build those contacts specifically with companies. We do that here, and we also do that off-site. So we just came back over A bunch of folks came back from New York. We had several site visits, one set for marketing and one set for finance, for example, in New York. So they do that both locally and further afield.
Wonderful. So that is all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, these have been fantastic questions. You all have been so engaged with us, so we thank you for that. Couple next steps before we sign out. Please take a moment to fill out our satisfaction survey to let us know how we did, and ask any additional burning questions that you did not get to ask today or that we didn't have time to address. We also want to invite you to attend any of our upcoming alumni career webinars. So I host alumni webinars every month on a variety of career topics, and they are open to the full Brandeis community, including you as parents. We also hope you'll join us in the Brandeis Parents and Families Facebook group if you haven't already. I know that's how many of you may have heard about this webinar in general. It's a great way to both share and get advice from fellow parents. And then just leaving you with our contact information here. We're happy to talk with you not only about what we covered in the webinar today, but specific strategies for your student. We're happy to work with your student directly and hope you will encourage them to use our office. So thank you so much, Andrea. This has been a jam-packed hour and 5 minutes. And thank you, all of you, for joining us on your lunch hour. And we hope to hear from you soon.